Let's talk fertility in labs. I'm Dr. Mimi, and I help couples optimize their health and fertility through a root cause whole body approach. I'm new to YouTube as of this recording, so thanks for being here. And also, if you're new here, my goal with this channel is to help you better understand your body and fertility and uncover what may be quietly interfering with fertility or significantly interfering with fertility, and to give you practical science-based ways to support it naturally. Today we're talking about common lab patterns that I find that can affect fertility. Many of the imbalances I discuss are incredibly common, yet they're often missed or minimized in traditional medical settings. Either they aren't included on routine lab work, pretty common, or the results are labeled as normal even when they can be contributing to fertility challenges, or they're just missed and overlooked. We're just gonna jump right in. So first up is blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance. This is so common. Up to 1 in 3 Americans are insulin resistant. Blood sugar dysregulation drives nearly every chronic disease. It's not just a diabetic issue. That's one of the biggest myths. And the problem is, most providers aren't checking insulin. Many are only looking at glucose, which can change day to day, hour to hour. It's variable, and some providers will check HbA1c, which is a marker for average blood glucose over 3 months. But your insulin levels can be elevated and driving inflammation and oxidative stress for years before these other 2 markers get flagged as elevated on blood work. Insulin is a master hormone. It can have an effect on so many aspects of reproduction. In men, insulin resistance is associated with lower sperm count, reduced motility, higher DNA fragmentation, and lower testosterone. In women, it can mess with ovulation, can contribute to PCOS. It's actually a hallmark feature of it. Actually, now it's called PMOS to acknowledge the metabolic component, which, by the way, you don't have to be overweight to have insulin resistance, which is why I check it on everybody. High insulin impacts egg quality, implantation, miscarriage risk, and risk for common pregnancy outcomes like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, large for gestational age. So that's a big one there. One of the first videos I made is on insulin resistance, so check that out if you want to learn more. Next up is thyroid support, including subclinical hypothyroidism. Thyroid function is all about metabolism and energy. That's pretty important for fertility and pregnancy, right? I mean, pregnancy is the most metabolically demanding time of your life. You're building a new human from scratch. That requires a lot of energy. Your thyroid hormones regulate ovulation, implantation, and early pregnancy maintenance. And I do often find multiple thyroid hormones are low, or at least functionally low, meaning the thyroid may need support or some other areas that are impacting thyroid function. Most providers don't run a full thyroid panel. Most just run either just TSH or TSH and free T4. And TSH isn't a thyroid hormone. It stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. So it stimulates the thyroid to make your thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. So if we want the full picture, we need more than just TSH. It's not uncommon that I find TSH is in range and thyroid hormones are low. Or even sometimes I find that TSH is low and thyroid hormones are also low, which would go against what we would expect and can indicate a more central issue going on. So again, a full thyroid panel is so important to get the full picture. And I do often find, especially women, need support most commonly, but I do see it in men. Not as common, but I do find it in men. Another common pattern is chronic inflammation. Now, there is a specific marker for systemic inflammation that I check, and that's hsCRP, or high sensitive C-reactive protein. I check it on everyone initially. Chronic inflammation can interfere with ovulation, implantation, miscarriage risk again, and overall reproductive health. In my practice, I don't see it as commonly as the last 2 topics I mentioned, but it is fairly common, and it's common in conditions like PCOS, obesity, and some other inflammatory reproductive disorders. Studies also show that chronic inflammation can contribute to oxidative stress, which can damage mitochondrial function in the oocyte or egg and reduce egg quality. This can affect fertilization rates and may increase the risk of early embryo arrest or chromosomal abnormalities. And then in men, elevated hsCRP is associated with reduced sperm parameters like concentration, mobility, morphology, count. Chronic inflammation increases oxidative stress, which sperm are particularly sensitive to. So this can impair sperm DNA integrity and overall fertility potential. I do have a video on oxidative stress and its impacts on sperm and egg, which I think is super interesting. So check that out if you want to learn more about that. I think it's fascinating. But hsCRP is a marker for systemic inflammation. But there are other things that can point to inflammation on labs, and that could be a lipid panel that's off if LDLs are high, HDLs are high, which most people don't consider. HDLs are the good cholesterol. They should be high, but if they're too high, I'm asking more questions. If triglycerides are high, that indicates metabolic dysfunction, so I would expect insulin may be elevated, and that also can drive inflammation. So more indirectly here, but ferritin is something I run, and I don't see this super often, but that can also indicate inflammation if it's elevated. Ferritin is a storage form of iron, but it's also what we call an acute phase reactant. So when it's elevated, it indicates inflammation, which I think is pretty interesting. Next up is immune system dysregulation. The immune system and reproductive system are deeply connected. Ladies, your immune system needs to make a major shift for pregnancy. Pregnancy depends on a precisely timed immune shift, and when the immune system is already overactive or stressed, that shift may be harder to make. This can affect implantation, placental development, and overall pregnancy health. Now, the routine blood work I run isn't diagnosing reproductive immune disorders, but it does give me insight as to whether the immune system is under stress. One of the first places I look, which is a very common panel, is the CBC with the differential. Specifically, I'm looking at the white blood cell count and the breakdown of those different immune cells. I often see low white blood cell counts or patterns in the differential that make me start asking more questions about, one, chronic infections, inflammation, immune activation. There can be other things like nutrient deficiencies and stress that play a role too. Also autoimmunity. So it's not super specific, but it does get me asking deeper questions. And looking at the differential, so that's your neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, basophils. That's the breakdown of the white blood cell count. I often find these markers are out of range, and that can help us determine the possibilities of immune stressors. For example, not to get too into the weeds here, but elevated neutrophils can suggest a bacterial process, while elevated lymphocytes may point toward a viral process. But these markers are never interpreted in isolation. So if I see that, I'm not like, you have a virus, you have a chronic viral infection. Am I asking more questions? Yes. And I'm not going to go through all of them in the differential, but in my lab offer, by the way, you get access to all of these markers I'm talking about and so much more. And I walk you through the interpretation. It is so cool, and we get so much amazing information from it. Here's something really simple you can probably check right now. Not to make this video too long, but with the neutrophils and lymphocytes, we want a 2-to-1 ratio. And I do fairly often see this skewed, indicating a few possibilities, but if you have blood work with the CBC and your differential, it's gonna be at the bottom of that. So check your neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. It should be 2-to-1. So just divide the neutrophil by the lymphocyte number. And a couple things about this. Medical literature tells us that even when the white blood cell count is in the normal range, if the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is 2.5 or higher, it indicates chronic low-grade inflammation. So you can calculate yours and see if you fall in that optimal range. A higher neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio has been found to be significantly associated with increased miscarriage risk. If it's closer to a 1-to-1 ratio, like if neutrophils are 44% and lymphocytes are 41%, it's not diagnostic, but it can be associated with autoimmunity. So I'm asking more questions if I see that. So those are just some examples. I don't very commonly see each individual example I just mentioned, but when I look at the whole panel, I do often see patterns of immune imbalance on initial blood work. I do also check thyroid antibodies to see if there's any autoimmune thyroid process going on. I check TPOs and thyroglobulin antibodies, not the most common thing I find, but I'll kind of lump that in with immune dysfunction. Next, I want to talk about the liver because I do often see the liver need support. Again, it's not as common as maybe nutrient insufficiencies, which I haven't talked about yet, or metabolic dysfunction, but I do see it commonly. And this conclusion can be drawn in many ways. First, we can look at the liver markers, ALT and AST, which I do find at least functionally elevated fairly commonly in both men and women. So even slight elevations in ALT, by the way, can indicate early fatty liver disease. The liver is also involved in thyroid hormone conversion, lipid metabolism, iron handling. So if thyroid hormones are low, lipids are off, or iron has been abnormal over time, I'm starting to think about liver as part of the picture. So there are a lot of other symptoms and lab findings that can point me to the liver needing help, but these are probably the most common that I see. What's going on with the actual liver markers, of course, and then lipid panel, thyroid function if T3 is low. And then the liver is actually the main place where iron is stored and handled in the body. So when iron levels are off over and over again, it can mean the liver's liver's job of managing iron is not working as it should. At the same time, too much iron can build up in the liver and harm it. So something that I keep in mind, and something to remember with all of these things, thyroid function, immune function, even metabolic function and inflammation, they are all influenced by nutrient status. So if key nutrients are low, that can absolutely show up in labs. Which brings me to my next point. The last most common thing I find on labs that is super common in my practice that can be impacting your egg and sperm quality, your ability to conceive and carry a pregnancy, are nutrient needs. Some common, very important nutrient needs I routinely check are iron, B12, and vitamin D. I do often check omegas and CoQ10, and we can also identify other nutrient needs through other markers I run in the panel, which is pretty cool. Something we have to decipher though, which is why we take lab results in context of the person's history and presentation, symptoms, and lifestyle environment, is we need to identify our nutrient needs showing up because simply the person is not getting it in their diet or with supplementation, or is it something like they have poor absorption and we need to work on the gut, which is fairly common, or maybe an infection is stealing nutrients like iron, for example. There are multiple possibilities, but the point is a nutrient isn't always low because you're not getting it in your diet or supplementation. So we want to explore the possibilities, because if you just supplement when you have something else going on, it's not really going to fix the issue, and your outcome may suffer because of that. So like everything else I do, I never interpret these markers in isolation. They're just one piece of the puzzle, and I combine that with your symptoms, your history, your lifestyle, the rest of your labs. It's like a fun game connecting the dots to put together this picture of what's going on with your body. And there's rarely ever one thing that causes labs to be off, which is why working with a provider who uses a functional approach is so essential, because we look at you as a whole and try to find all of the contributing factors: lifestyle, environment, your habits, your toxin exposures, and more, if you can believe it. I could talk about each of these topics here for an hour, and I actually have. And something important too is I often find multiple of these patterns when I look at blood work. If you want a breakdown of the labs I run on my fertility clients, what I typically start with, I'll leave a link to get the free guide I made in the caption. And if you want these exact labs ran, I just finished an offer where you get access to this blood work so long as you have access to a LabCorp in your area, and you get access to a member portal where I walk you through the interpretation, which is so awesome. I've been working on it for over a year. I will leave that in the caption too. That's where we really can start getting real answers about underlying root causes of dysfunction and how your body is responding to its environment, so we can make a strategic game plan to optimize your fertility. Labs are just one piece of health and fertility, this whole picture, but I do think they are a really important and helpful piece. And I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please subscribe, share with those who need it, and I will see you in the next video.